Greetings Guardians, my name is Bife here. So, this is a video that I very much did not want to have to make. I think it's worth saying before all of this goes on that I much prefer times in Destiny when I don't need to make critique of the game, but critiques we need to continue to make, and I need to call it like I see it. That's part of my job and it's part of what puts me in the position that I'm in. It's a trust thing as much as anything else. That being said, today we're going to be talking about a bunch of things. First of all, we're going to talk about the Veil one more time. I know, it's been going through people's feeds a lot, and I imagine there are some of you that are absolutely sick of hearing about it, so in this instance, for those of you who are, maybe turn off. I'll have actual story stuff about it, as opposed to it being a narrative problem in future videos, but that's very much not what we're talking about here. I also wanted to use this as an opportunity to discuss recent updates from Bungie, which is realistically what prompted all of these things, although I won't lie, it was informed also by things such as the recent Skill Up review of things, and even Dato's latest critique of the game. And I also wanted to, as a result, talk about where things are with the lore and narrative generally. The last time I touched on stuff like this, I made my 24-hour impressions video about 24 hours into Lightfall, and I gave everybody my take there. That was 24 hours in. Things have developed since then. Some problems that I mentioned back then have very much still remained. There is a lot more nuance to be added now, because you know what? We all know a little bit more, and I've completed the raid, and we've had our hands on the raid lore in its majority for a while now, so we have a better grasp of what kind of beast Lightfall is. And so this is also kind of a final critique kind of thing, where I'm analysing where Lightfall is. It's worth noting, of course, that as the time of this year goes on, there will be more seasonal story, of course. But for the moment, Lightfall is basically done. And as far as everything is concerned with its story, it's been delivered and experienced. And I want to talk about that in particular, no seasonal stuff whatsoever. So, to break all of this down into sections, first I wanted to touch on the discourse around the Veil and talk about us as a community injecting a little bit of nuance and talking about the real problems with it and the story of Lightfall. Secondly, I wanted to talk about what Bungie has said regarding the Veil and the story stuff going forward, and I want to levy my thoughts and critique there. And thirdly, I wanted to discuss the nature of the lore in Lightfall versus the story in Lightfall, and talk about how some things really don't feel like they completely add up. So, let's start off by talking about the discourse around what the Veil is, people's opinions on the campaign, and the problems that are inherent with all of this. This is a topic that normally I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, but for the sake of everyone else in the community, and for the sake of being able to say this one thing and then put the issue to bed, I want to address it to some, not all of you. There was an incredibly unhappy divide between some of you, and I suspect that there still is. I want to say first that this is a video game, it ain't that deep. No matter what someone's opinion on it is, you can go ahead and still engage with them and politely disagree in this instance. This is a story, this is a narrative. This is not something which impacts a person's life that much. You can all sit there and have your own opinions and politely disagree. No one is in trouble for doing so in this instance. On that note, surprising absolutely nobody, the last 2 weeks of my social media feed, and I imagine the feed of anybody else who's connected to the narrative of the game, has been absolutely filled with dialogue, all of it talking about the campaign and the lore, but mostly the campaign, and all of it rendering it either good or bad whilst also declaring the other side of the aisle as intellectually bankrupt. I need you all to know that I've seen this from everyone on every side, and I want to tell all of you right now to stop it. Oh my god. All of you, stop it. Worst of all, I saw people threatening Bungie devs, or just using all of the critique levied at the game as an excuse to dogpile them on social media, and to all of you who are doing that, a sincere you from me. Seriously, what the hell is wrong with you? If you are passionate about these things, you can be passionate, but in no normal circumstance should you be given free rein to go at a community manager on Twitter, You absolute cretins, you total morons. This last bit certainly does not apply to all of you. I know that there are lots of you who've engaged with the community managers and other Bungie devs in a really respectful manner, but to those of you who have been rude to them, to those of you who have even gone as far as sending death threats, or have gone to the place where you have sat down and decided that you just wanted to be rude, I think you should eternally have this note that you shouldn't be rude to game devs bolted to your Twitter account. Either way, that is not the bit that I want to talk about in the majority of it, because I'm going to assume that most of you are not sociopaths. And I'm going to approach this in the calm manner that it needs to be approached, so that is the angry portion of all this done. Passion gets us riled up. This is part of what I'm about to say. This next bit I want to approach calmly, because it is to the sane majority of you, who are simply passionate and are sitting there and getting caught up in the emotion of the argument, saying that the game is either terrible and arguing with other people on the other side. So, to those people on both sides, I'm going to go ahead and reiterate this. Passion gets all of us riled up. Regardless of where we sit, we are all passionate about this thing, and I can tell that because on one side of things, we have people that have been made angry because the thing that they love has let them down, and on the other side, there are people who are defensive because people are criticizing the thing that they love. That being said, our passion and our ability to respect the perspectives of other players within the community should not ever be something that precludes us from talking about obvious problems with the game. If you loved Lightfall's story, this is the moment where I'm going to go ahead and tell you that this is going to run against the grain of your opinion. I also want to let you know that under no circumstances am I trying to take away from your love of the story. There are bits to Lightfall that I really enjoyed, and there are bits to Lightfall that I really did not think were right. I loved moments that included Osiris, and his explanations of the way that the light and the dark function as forces within the universe of Destiny. It drove me mad whenever there was no explanation of core story elements. That's just an example. Regardless of where you sit on things, I'm going to say it again, I am under no circumstances trying to take away your love of the story or invalidate it with the words I'm about to say. So, as I've just said, you are entitled to your opinion, but we also need to acknowledge that there were faults with the campaign. So, when I talk about what I perceive as flaws with the campaign, I don't want to use just my perspective. I want to talk about them in an objective manner if I possibly can, or a manner that is as objective as possible, if not that. And the reason I say that is because there is an objective failure here, and it is something we need to reiterate and talk about. Now, hear me out before you go and respond in the comments section if you do disagree, because you know what? I'm going to go on a tangent to explain what I mean and to get to the objective point of what's going on. And I'm going to do that via way of a tangent. In his recent video talking about the state of Day 1 endgame raiding and the Day 1 Root of Nightmares clears, Datto said something that really stuck out to me, and it defined things for the way that it is the inverse of how things are in the place that I operate. Take a quick listen to this short excerpt.
Saw this sentiment a few times. Why does the new raid need to be the new stepping stone into raiding? Why can't any of the various older, easier pieces of raid content be the stepping stone? Be the noob-friendly things? The new thing has to be the easiest? But what about new players, Datto? New players shouldn't be in the contest mode. It's not designed for them. Or it shouldn't be. If we need to completely disintegrate the game down to the lowest common denominator, if we are crushing the game down so badly that everything needs to be available to be completed by people who are brand new to the game, that contest mode needs to be completable by brand new 8-day-old players, then just let me know. I don't want the raid balanced around guy who has never made a build in his life and who must use a sidearm for day 1 content because they have more fun that way. Hashtag Trespasser Gang, rise up.
I wanted to go ahead and say here that Datto is completely correct as far as what the developers are probably aiming for, and about the point that he is making. And his point is sort of the inverse of what is needed for the campaign. Datto is talking about contest mode raiding here very specifically, which is something that he believes should be a truly endgame challenge that Bungie should design with endgame elite players in mind due to the circumstances of that activity. Normal raids are a different story, but for those opening 24 to 48 hours of a raid, when contest mode is enabled, when you are significantly weaker against the bosses, you should experience a degree of challenge because you are doing something which derives its merit and glory from that challenge. I agree with what Datto is saying, especially given that contest mode raiding has become all the more accessible with an actual contest modifier, meaning that you cannot go above a certain power level, meaning that you don't get a huge advantage and need to grind, that you don't necessarily need to have filled out everything, that there is a much more level and even playing field in terms of having teams that are skillful enough to attain victory. Now, this is a total non sequitur. This is our tangent. Why am I bringing this up? Especially given that I just agreed with someone's opinion and I said only a few minutes ago that I was going to talk about an objective problem. The reason I'm bringing this up is because the campaign is the complete inverse of Day 1 contest raiding. Legendary mode difficulty versus normal mode difficulty aside, which is not part of what we're discussing here, when it comes to the narrative of the campaign, unlike a Day 1 raiding experience, most everyone who plays the expansion is going to play the campaign story. That means that it needs to be broadly accessible to people in a narrative sense, and again, easy to conflate the two, but I am not talking about the legendary campaign difficulty, which again, frankly, I think is in a pretty good place. I am talking about how easy it is to understand the story and get to grips with it, because ultimately, that is what everyone is going to experience. Like I said, this is the complete inverse of Day 1 raiding. One of these experiences is built with a small number of elite players in mind. The other is built with all players in mind. And just to rail it home for a third time, I am not talking about legendary campaign difficulty here. I am talking about how easy it is to understand the story and get to grips with elements of it. Also, to inject a little further nuance, by the way, a story that is easy to understand does not mean a bad story either. Witch Queen thoroughly explains its story elements before the narrative truly kicks off, using its opening few cutscenes and first mission, which is free to everyone, as a means of introducing Savathun as a villain, why she matters, and what the premise of the entire campaign is. It's pretty simple. We learn that she's a part of the Hive race, that somehow she's stolen the light, which is our most powerful tool, and that we need to uncover how she's done that, as well as what her further plans might be. Could that be better for a new player? Absolutely. But it covers enough of the basics to allow the rest of the story to progress and to allow players to understand it. Even when more complicated elements of the narrative arrive that you absolutely need to know about, you are presented with explanations for them in the campaign. Lightfall is different from the Witch Queen in the sense that it does not do this. At no point is it explained what the Veil is, or how it powers the Cloud Arc, or why the Witness wants it, or what the Radial Mast is, or why linking it to the Veil matters to the Witness's plans, or what the Witness accomplished when it did link to the Veil. These fundamental questions, which are important to understanding the motivations of both our enemies and our allies, are never answered, and that will always be a problem. I know that there are some amongst you claiming that this is fine, because Bungie are allowed to create greater mysteries that aren't necessarily answered, or are answered later in the seasonal story. Now, referring back to what I said earlier, that is a totally valid opinion, but it needs to be said that so are the opinions of every player who was confused by the plot elements that were presented and not adequately explained. Their confusion is as valid as your reverence for the larger mystery that still needs more time to unfold. They are also sadly the objective part of what I have been building to, because they are the voice that will never be heard in the comments of this video, or on Reddit, or on Twitter, or in any part of the Destiny community, because they, objectively, are not here. They are gone. Regardless of what opinion you might hold, here is the objective fact. A new player who was hoping to jump into Lightfall and go for a wild ride, get invested in the franchise's story, and jump in for the next year until final shape, was met with a wall of questions that left even Destiny veterans stumped. If I can't answer those questions, if most people who sit there and consider themselves to be lore buffs can't adequately answer those questions without injecting theory, without sitting there and referring to other elements like the Heart of the Black Garden, which also is not well understood, then how are we going to expect those new players to not be confused? And here's the thing, this is the objective fact. Many of those new players will have left confused, and they will not come back. That is the cold hard fact of the matter, that they are now the tragic statistic of Lightfall. They are the ones who were failed, not us. Those are people that could have engaged with us in a future moment in the hobby that we loved, this hobby called Destiny, and those are people who may now never pick it up again. Any reverence we might have to the mystery that Bungie will be unfolding in front of us over the next year is pointless to the people who have already left to spend their time and their money elsewhere. They have voted with their feet and they are out the door. Just in the same way that the endgame day one raiding scene isn't for new players, the campaign absolutely should be, and it's because of that simple fact. If you can't hook players with a story that people understand, they will not play your game. Granted, you do not always play the game for the story, but we are focusing on the narrative here, and the reason for that should be obvious. It was one of the things that drove the narrative around Lightfall as bad game. It was one of the core things that led to those massive, mostly negative reviews on Steam. It was one of the most heavily critiqued things, and that is not a reflection of an opinion alone. It is a reflection of the fact that the story will be impenetrable for new players and they will leave the game unsatisfied. Remember that that is the original purpose of a review. It's to tell someone if they'll enjoy it. It is fine to hold on to an appreciation for a larger mystery that unfolds over time, but for those confused players, it is already too late. And whilst I've made a lot of mention of new players, I think it would be also fair to point out that this absolutely applies to returning players as well. People looking for an excuse to jump back into Destiny who may have heard that the seasonal story that's been on offer recently is actually really good. I think we do well generally in the future as a community that cares about the story and lore of this game to remind ourselves of this group of people whenever we discuss the campaign or the lore or anything else going forward. Because whilst we as a crowd of lore enthusiasts are definitely going to stick around, we may be bolted on to this game, we are not growing our hobby if we allow it to be obscured to new adherents. And by not critiquing the game, that's ultimately what we're doing. I've heard a take that goes something like, if this expansion wasn't called Lightfall and didn't have the expectations of being the penultimate part of the saga, then this wouldn't be as much of a problem. And whilst it's tempting to believe that in its entirety, I think the more nuanced reality is that at least some questions deserve to be definitively answered no matter what, especially when those questions are integral to the player's understanding of the plot and the appreciation of the moments that are occurring on screen in front of them. With that in mind, let's move on to the second part of the video. I know, about 20 minutes in. Regardless, we move on, and we need to talk briefly about what Bungie announced recently in the TWAB before Raid Day. The relevant parts of the passage for the TWAB read as follows. New revelations and rewards to come. As we mentioned in last week's TWAB, a new year of storytelling kicked off with Lightfall and will continue through our seasons between now and the final shape. While we're just a week into the Season of Defiance, and we don't always share future narrative details this far in advance, we feel it's important to give everyone a preview of a particular quest we're bringing to Neomuna in Season of the Deep. For those of you who do not know, that is next season, as well as rewards it will provide. Throughout this quest, players will explore the city to learn about the nature of the Veil through Osiris's research and newly uncovered Ishtar data. This brief pursuit will be available to all Lightfall owners and will take place separately from the events of Season of the Deep. The quest will also remain available in Neomuna in perpetuity for all Lightfall owners, so you won't miss out on the chance to pick it up after Year 6 comes to a close. There's been a lot of speculation that this quest was rushed out to appease the story criticisms. There is even some word going around that says this was cut from Lightfall and held back for later content. Regardless of what you believe, I don't think that either of those avenues are really something I want to discuss. To entertain it for even a second doesn't level critique that would have been in the hands of the narrative team to address. And frankly, I think that when it comes to such a hot-button topic, regardless of the veracity of such rumors, it's worth not discussing them in the first place, especially when they can very obviously be used as fuel for people trying to say awful things to developers. Remember that while 95% of us are sane, level-headed people, that 5%, the 1 in 20 who are not, are going to use this as yet another excuse to shout obscenities towards developers on social media, and I for one am sick of seeing it happen, so I'm going to shut down speculation on this particular point right now. We are not going to allow this paragraph, or this image, or this quest to become a springboard for people to become toxic towards developers. With that being said, I am going to assume that this was always meant to be the scheduled release date of this content for the next bit of critique. The critique I would then give to Bungie is simply this. This content comes way too late for everyone. Hey, I told you, the story's just unfolding over time, the Happy for Mystery contingent will say, and you know what? Good. I'm honestly glad for that much. Honestly, I'm with you in the sense that personally, I'm just really glad to finally know what the Veil is. I'm happy for the mystery to unfold. But this isn't about my personal wants. We're talking brass tacks here, and this isn't going to bring back players who have lapsed again or who never got into the story because it was narratively impenetrable. This quest, for all the importance of the things it's explaining, should honestly have been a part of the Lightfall campaign at launch, not released a season later when the players who needed that knowledge more than anyone else have already left. I would have taken this over any mission involving Strand. It was so much more important for the story, and I think it would have been something that dramatically reshaped players' enjoyment of the narrative, and allowed us to adequately say, I understand what happened better in the campaign because I understand what the Veil is. I understand what this core aspect of the story is that everyone goes on. I really considered rewatching the entire campaign just to see how many times the Veil is mentioned, because at that point I would have a number. But I realized that number really doesn't matter. The number is too high regardless of whether it's 12 times or 30 times, or if it was even as ludicrous as 100 times, which of course it wasn't. The point is, it was mentioned enough to make it clear that it was important, and yet this thing, the Veil, which is mentioned so much, is never explained. And this quest that comes along to do that has come along too late. It is good that the mystery will get explained eventually, and perhaps Bungie is going to show us an amazing quest with this. I imagine everyone will be doing this regardless because it rewards new aspects for Strand, if nothing else. But again, this is something new players who have already left are never going to care about because they are gone. You do not see them in this discourse because they have already voted with their feet. So, with all of that said, I imagine that there are going to be a few of you that were looking at this last part of the video and are going to be sitting there with an expectation that this is just going to be me trashing the game. You were probably expecting something like a title that said a post-mortem of Destiny 2 Lightfall story and lore, or expected me to be just constantly talking trash and have long, disappointed sighs at developers specifically, when I would remind you all the only long, disappointed sighs I've had throughout this entire thing have been at people abusing devs. Well, to that contingent of people, I have good news. Not good news because I'm affirming your opinion, good news because, astoundingly enough, I am not here to simply say bad game, and astoundingly enough, to those people who will reduce anything that I would say or anyone else critiquing the game would say to simply game bad, I will say the following. Nuance does exist, and two things can be true at once. Nuance exists, and here are the two things that are true at once. Let's make this clear. Lightfall itself has problems, but Lightfall itself, as a general package, when you look beyond the narrative, is not actually a bad expansion. It's actually a pretty good one. It just has a bad story. The number of people who took my day one critique of the narrative, keep in mind the narrative alone as a reflection on the whole game, makes me really fear for people's attention spans, reading comprehension, and critical thinking skills. When I state at the start of the video that I am speaking of the narrative alone, that does not apply to my criticisms to the Crucible, or Strand's new sandbox potential, or the difficulty changes, or the new systems that were implemented. And you know why? Because a thing called nuance exists, and it scares me that so many people were very willing to dumpster the game in its entirety when only my particular certain aspect of the game that I am really focused on was what I was critiquing. That may have been an important part to it, don't get me wrong, everyone plays the campaign, I already said that. But to say that the entire game sucked as a result lacks nuance. And that's the thing that really is biting away at me, is this take of, well, just people lacking nuance, sitting there and wanting to lump the game into a thing of game good or game bad, and letting those two binaries be the places in which we exist, because that's all we can apparently do, is game good or game bad. You want to get even more nuanced and you want to get into something that really puzzles me? Here's the thing, the lore of this expansion is actually pretty phenomenal. I would say that as far as the post-campaign stuff, the raid stuff, and the lore of the expansion generally is concerned, it has the kind of enormous groundbreaking strides that an expansion titled Lightfall should. Look at the deterministic Chaos Quest alone. It led us deliberately to hints on Nezarec based on the locations it sent you to, and the fact that Nezarec would whisper specifically in those locations. Now it turns out that all of that stuff wasn't linked to the quest at all, but you can hardly fault Bungie for putting the raid villain front and center as a good tease. You also, in that quest, had huge revelations about the Heart of the Black Garden, and you saw more lore and understandings about the Cloudstriders. The Neomuna quest chain, which led up to the Winterbite glaive, tells us about a series of new heroes in the form of the previous Cloudstriders, each of which was hiding something that they couldn't talk about that in the end turns out to be Soteria, the AI from last season that helped to save and probably found Neomuna in its core entirety. And don't get me started on the raid lore, which is clearly still unfolding before us now and which might have consequences reaching into not only future seasons but future expansions. The writing is diverse and engaging, and its presentation within the world comes in everything from secret exotic quests to random in-game events to writing that you'll see on your weapons lore tabs and flavor text, to bits of dialogue sprouted by NPCs in-game, to the mysteries of Nezarec's whispers. The game's lore is good right now. It is up there with Witch Queen and Forsaken and Taken King as some of the most engaging stuff that's been put out there. Which makes it even more curious to me that the narrative team wrote such phenomenal lore and yet the story was kind of mediocre. Something feels off there, and whilst I don't want to speculate on why, I do think I would like to use this moment in this video as a platform to give Bungie the following feedback and to say a few things. First of all, the narrative team didn't do well here, and yet they did. The story was bad, the lore is excellent, and it's clear to me that the narrative team clearly still has it in them. Great stories are still possible and great lore is still being written. Reading the lore on the Acolytes of Nezarec alone convinced me of this. I don't know what happened with the campaign, but we know from Witch Queen that this team can do better. We know it because of previous experiences, because of seasonal content that has redefined what Destiny can have as a story. I'd love to use this opportunity to say to Bungie that the campaign should be something that is deeply rewarding for players that have been within the story of Destiny for a long time, but it also should be digestible for players who have just arrived and are fresh faces. Lightfall might not have achieved the former for everyone, but it most definitely didn't achieve the latter for the new players or returning players that were first greeted by it. I also need to say something which runs in direct opposition to Bungie's current model of content, which is this. You have stated in the TWAB just there that this mission, where we're learning about the Veil through Osiris's research and a bunch of Ishtar data, is something that will stay around for all Lightfall owners past the end of this year's worth of content. That is good. Here's the thing. If the future narratives leading up to Final Shape are equally important to understanding Final Shape, and if they are equally foundational as far as getting to know the Witness and to enjoying Final Shape are concerned, then there needs to be a readjustment. And this goes directly in opposition to Bungie's current content delivery model, which is this. Those seasonal narratives need to stay. I understand those bits of content get vaulted all the time every year, and I understand that a request like this doesn't make sense financially. I know that this also does not technically make sense for a game that is already pretty bloated and is only going to get bigger. But as far as core story, not lore, story is concerned, I think that if these pieces of content are going to be valuable to a player's understanding and enjoyment of the final part of this 10-year saga, then they should firmly stay. And that, I think, is the biggest ask I will have of this video. It is excellent to see that no matter what, the quest explaining what the Veil is going to be available to all Lightfall owners and will stay in spite of seasonal content being vaulted. But that seasonal content is important too, and for this one story element where the saga is starting to conclude, if there are key narrative moments that absolutely do help to assess and establish what is going to happen in the Final Shape, I would argue that those pieces of content need to remain in the game as well. It's been well over 30 minutes into this, so as one last note, I dearly do hope, and sincerely do hope, that things get better. On a personal note, it was a really dubious honor of sorts, but the Lightfall critique that I made within the first 24 hours of Lightfall's release was one of the biggest videos I've had in a while. I made it hit trending on all of YouTube. It hit number 12, and that is something that I desperately wish wasn't the case. It hurt to make that content knowing that at first, seemingly nothing good would come of it. Yes, it was critique, and critique ultimately improves the game, but people often use moments of critique like this as carte blanche to harass developers, or to generally dunk on the game as a whole. Nuance be damned. But I made that video anyway because in the end the feedback process is important, and because if we players can't voice our concerns for games, then they don't get better. This is how we got to Season of the Chosen. This is how we got to Forsaken. This is how we got to the Taken King. We as Destiny players voiced our criticisms, voiced our concerns, and some of the best narrative content that we have experienced happened. When Destiny 1 Vanilla released, the critique that was leveled there would be seen in action a year later at Destiny 1 The Taken King, what is lauded as one of the best expansions in Destiny history. When Destiny 2 was commonly critiqued in its vanilla release, the critique ended up being taken by a community summit where players and content creators and pundits came to give their feedback about what it was that made their game truly their game. It was something which allowed Bungie to refocus, and as a result, we got Destiny 2 Forsaken, which is lauded as the best expansion that Destiny has ever shipped. Bungie has also hit high hurdles on the seasonal front of things, but not before they've stumbled. Season of the Worthy had a great ending as far as the narrative beats were concerned, but it was also regarded as one of the worst expansions that people had seen in a while. It was from critique like that, in seasons like that, that I think 9 months later we would end up getting Season of the Chosen. What is seen now as one of the best seasonal content model delivery points in Destiny's history. 3 months worth of content that culminated in a story that not only introduced one of the setting's most beloved characters in Keitel, but also showed us some true drama and showed us that the seasonal model's content can deliver an amazing B-plot. I'm here to tell you now, in this moment, that the critique we are giving here in Lightfall will matter, and that these things will have an effect on the final shape. I have seen for years what Bungie has been able to do when they've been given solid critique and have been put in the correct direction by the community, and I believe that it can be done again. At the end of the Season of the Chosen, I declared that the idea of Destiny having a bad story was a myth that needed to die like the old times of D1 had died. I took up that soapbox and made it my home because for years I've been trying to tell people that there was something worth hearing about in the game's story. In the times when the story was really bad prior to all of this, I stepped on that soapbox anyway. And why do I keep doing this? Because I think that people genuinely can find some enjoyment out of this, and because, as SkillUp once put it, Bungie are my team. This is exactly how I feel and how I've felt for years. They may win and they may lose, but the reality of it is that I'm always rooting for them, and I'm always hoping that they do well or do better. I can absolutely be disappointed with their losses, but I'm never sadistically hoping for them. I can absolutely accept that screw-ups happen and less excellent moments will occur, because I also know that embracing the lessons of these moments allows us to eventually reach even greater heights. Taken King couldn't happen without Destiny 1. Forsaken couldn't happen without Destiny 2. Season of the Chosen couldn't happen without Season of the Worthy. And in my opinion, I'm fairly confident when I say that Final Shape can't happen without Lightfall. Bungie has this time around hit a bigger hurdle than they've had to face in a while. Not since The Taken King has Bungie needed to so adequately realign people's expectations with the reality of things. Not since Taken King have things seemed this dire. But that shouldn't stop Bungie from finishing this race. This is my last note that I'm going to make on the narrative of the story and the Veil and the critiques of Lightfall that I've registered. I'll still be making theory about the Veil and lore stuff, but as far as critiquing it as a story element is concerned, this is my piece. I've said it. If I can leave all of you, my audience, with something, it's simply this. We live in a world that is more complicated than the black and white that we are often led to believe. If you're the kind of person reducing anyone else's nuanced opinion down to either game bad or game excellent, then I beg of you to stop and consider where the reality of it all lies, because it is never a cut and dry thing. Shades of grey exist, and without an appreciation for those things, the world is not only a lot less joyful, but it also doesn't tend to get much better. Simplicity often doesn't bring improvement. For those of you who are with me on this journey and who have been here for 10 years, just like I have, I think that we all know that in spite of everything, there is a decent chance that Bungie pulls this off. But I don't want to sit there and say that you should be any less disappointed, or any less joyful. No matter where you sit on the spectrum, I'm with you, and I hope that I can do well to represent your opinions to Bungie in any respect. There is no easy way for me to toe a line that everyone will appreciate, but for you who keep on watching, and for you who voice your opinions down below in the comments, I am here to help make sure your voices are heard. If you enjoyed something about Lightfall, let me know it down below. And if you were disappointed about something in Lightfall, let me know as well. This, I think, is the responsible avenue of a content creator in my position. I can take what you say, I can amplify it, and I can host it here as a platform where Bungie devs will likely see it. And one last thing. Whilst, yes, we're talking a lot about collective responsibility and the obligations that we have to give feedback and the obligations that Bungie has to act on that feedback, and we're talking a lot about the nitty-gritty brass tacks process, I want to remind everyone as well that we all play video games for fun. Regardless of whether we find fun in the story or fun in simply web-slinging around with Strand, let's not forget that little simple fact. It's a video game, not a video job. At least for all of you lot it is. Anyway, for me it is a video job. Either way, that's all from me for today. This incredibly long video is something that I'm trying to get out to you and make sure that it's in decent time, and I'm sorry that it interrupts raid content, but I figured that if I didn't say something about this, I was going to go a little bit bonkers. So, yeah, hopefully this finds you well, hopefully you agree with what I've said here, and hopefully if you are in that place where you weren't making such nuanced commentary, you're now able to approach it with a little bit more respect. With all of that being said, thank you so much for watching. Thank you very much for being an audience that genuinely does put forward good commentary and good critique and does let developers know in a respectful manner what needs to be improved. And thank you for giving me even something close to the privileged position of speaking on your behalf. Of course, if you want more content, you know the typical things to do. Hit subscribe, bell next to subscribe. I will not be doing a critique piece like this for a while. It'll probably be at the very end of the season when we have that, although I don't expect there will be much to say given that it is a shorter season. In the meantime though, as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Bife. For Audacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.